but, you know, like backpacking and whatnot. But I have 2 dogs, and traveling with them is so much more fun. So, yeah, I started off roaming around in the Jeep, and it's just so small to have 2 dogs with me, and I always take my art with me everywhere, and I just really like having like a whole home space anywhere I want to go. So like I don't have to unpack a suitcase anywhere. I don't have to you know, get acquainted to a morning routine like in someone else's home when I go travel to a different state or country. I can just kind of like drive my bus, park it wherever. My coffee's always in the same place. My dogs have their own home. They don't have to like share it with anyone else, presumably. Yeah, it just kind of makes it a more comfortable living situation when we're able to do our daily routine and like have all of our stuff in one place and have it just be really cute and pink and comfy with my own throw pillows and not worry about having to put it all into a backpack. It makes it a lot more convenient with having the 2 dogs. I started off in my 2-door Jeep Wrangler before the bus, and at the time I didn't really have a concept that I was going to move into a bus. It was I was working at a software company in Dallas, Texas, and I didn't really know a lot of people in the area, and I just kind of wanted to start traveling a little bit more. I used to take the Jeep on road trips out to San Diego to see my best friend, and I would use like a little 2-week course, a 2-week journey out there to like make a bunch of stops with the dogs in between. And one of those road trips to see my best friend ended up turning from like 2 weeks into a month, into 2 months. And so when I started off in the Jeep, I took the back seat out, and then the front seat I like folded it down, and it's like, I think it's like 64 inches from like the dashboard to like the back door in my Jeep, and I am like, so that's like 5'4", and I'm like 5'2.5", so I had like just enough space to like sleep like this with like my head on like basically on the dashboard, which was surprisingly like okay. I barely ever actually slept in the Jeep. I made like a little build with like a kitchenette and some storage for gear and dog stuff, and then I ended up just like sleeping in the hammock almost every single night. And I thought that Dragon would be fine, like sleeping in the Jeep, like on the front seat, or sleeping on the ground or something. And like this guy slept in the hammock with me every night. I tried getting him his own hammock eventually, and he would just use that to climb into my hammock with me. So he and I slept in a hammock together every night for, I think it was like 4 or so months. And I had a full-time job working in software that I would wake up at the crack of dawn in the middle of nowhere and like try my damnedest to get any cell phone service, to take calls, and to like just be cracking away on the computer, and without my company knowing that that was happening. And so eventually I kind of just felt like I had run out of space inside, and that I knew it was a little bit more of a long-term lifestyle choice for me. So we, Dragon and I jetted out to Virginia in my Jeep, and we found the bus, and we just we took 1 month to build it out. And by we, I mean me and Dragon. They were both here helping. But yeah, I lived in it while I was doing it. It was really weird. Like I was kind of used to living in the Jeep at the time, so it was like that little amount of space. Like I would kind of just like, I built the bed I put the flooring in, and then as soon as I finished the flooring, I built the bed, and then we slept on the bed like without a mattress for like 2 solid weeks. It was like a pretty brutal process. Like we worked 20-hour days, like 7 days a week, but like 1 whole month, and we built out this whole bus, and then got back on the road. Yeah, which was really cool. I really, like when I bought the bus, I really thought that it would be like a 6-month adventure. And I'm just like, when we were leaving Colorado yesterday and I was driving down the road, I was like, there's no way my bus is doing this well right now. Like, But like sometimes I'm just like so astounded it just keeps running. Like after everything I keep putting it through, it just like keeps going. Like, but and it tows my Jeep while doing it, which is the coolest thing. But yeah, it's a giant badass engine. I just started off on a road trip. I had an apartment in Dallas and I had a roommate there. And I didn't have to go into the office back then. So I just kind of figured like I would take a couple weeks, maybe a month, and road trip to all the places on the West Coast that I hadn't been to before. So yeah, I mean, van life is not really a common thing in Virginia. Like, it's huge. If you go to San Diego, you'll immediately meet a million people who live in buses and vans and stuff. But, like, I had never met a single person who lived in a van and, like, who intentionally wanted to live in a van in Virginia. So, I just kind of started off on a road trip from Texas to San Diego and then going up the West Coast and yeah, it just seemed sustainable. Like it wasn't I didn't run into any like days where it was less pleasant to be out there seeing nature. And I was still able to like do my full-time job while it was a lot of like sitting in coffee shops, but like I remember a day where like I couldn't find any Wi-Fi for a series of calls I had that day. And then I just like ended up driving to Big Sur and going to like this beautiful outdoor patio like overlooking the ocean, and I had never heard of Big Sur before that day, and I got there and was like so stressed the whole morning about like getting Wi-Fi, and then I think I paid like $15 for a coffee to sit on this patio and just like ended up having the most gorgeous view, Wi-Fi, sat there for 4 hours and was like, all the stress that led up to this moment was really worth it. And I think that was just like, a long line of days where things like that happened, and it all just seemed really sustainable. And like maybe the stress that I was feeling from trying to make travel and work together was worth it for the long term for me. And a lot of those stresses were just like from living too tiny. Like the Jeep is really, really small. Like it's like 4 backpacks worth. So yeah, just like having my whole desk and my whole art studio in here and having like a closet with all of my stuff and enough gear that the dogs are able to be comfortable all the time has like really alleviated all of those issues that traveling and working at the same time created. Unwritten van life rules. So I think there's a huge responsibility about being on the road. I think there's some huge responsibilities that come along with being on the road about taking care of nature around you. And it's kind of funny because like it feels like those should be rules for everyone all the time. But being in more remote places, it's like abundantly more obvious the impact that you have on the natural world around you. And it's like sometimes I have to think back to like, well, why didn't I ever think about where any of this was going, like where my contribution was going back when I lived in a house? It was like because I wasn't harnessing the power of the sun to charge my iPhone today. I wasn't like sourcing natural dirt to compost my excrement that day. Like, I'm not like I'm so extremely conscious of like my water consumption now, because every ounce of water that I consume or that I use, I have to physically carry from a source. And water's heavy. It's like 8 pounds per gallon or something. And it just like really, really creates this this visual and physical cue for you that we should be taking care of like what's around us so much more. And I think like exploring so many different locations that I would have never explored growing up in Norfolk, Virginia, the world's largest naval base. Like it's, I feel like it's a huge industrial area with the largest military presence in the country. It is really easy to forget about all of the natural resources that we're actually consuming to create that. But like, you know, the first time I went to I spent a substantial amount of time in the desert, in Utah with climbing with some friends, and there's just like this statement that everybody says, don't bust the crust, and they're so serious about it, and to the point where like you might be chasing after your dog and then you just stop and reroute because you're like, oh, there's crust here. I don't want to be the person who's creating erosion in the desert. So I'm going to reroute so far around to not bust the crust. I think it's really cool that there's all these unwritten rules about taking care of the planet, and I really wish that, like, I love that van life has taught me more about those, but I really wish that they were like more present. Like, why was I learning about currency and different types of coins in kindergarten instead of like, hey, here's how you prevent erosion, like in a really serious way, this is how you take care of the planet around you, like in a super serious way, this is how you should be washing your dishes, like, because the water that goes out of your sink, whether it's a sink in a bus or whether it's a sink in a house, like, where does that water eventually go? So the soap that you're washing down your sink, how is that impacting fish or your future or waterways? Like, and then, you know, you go to a place like Dallas, Texas, and I've met like 3 people who are really, really into protecting White Rock Lake out there. And, it just like, they seemed like they were such extremists compared to everyone else there, which is so skewed that they were the extremists, like just trying to make sure that our waterways were like naturally taken care of. So I think that's like the really cool unwritten, sometimes written rules of van life, has been just like, hey, here's how you productively handle your waste, all types of waste. And yeah, more people should learn those rules for sure. So I make my money on the road, through my art. I'm a graphic designer for breweries, so I dabble in some graphic design with other clients, of course, too. But I make the beer can labels for microbreweries. I have 6 breweries that I work with across the country, and I'm always looking for more. But yeah, I have a really colorful, like kind of vibrant, weird, funky style of illustration, and I find that they're like working with breweries is a really fun way to get that art into the world without being like a high pressure, like, this has to be fancy graphic design for a dentist's office that's like has a white background and clean lines. So I do that, and I do murals. Their murals are pretty intensive, so you know, I mix and match. I have my standard clients, my graphic design clients that I do all year round and have a pretty regular schedule with, and then like 4 times a year, so you know, every few months I try to get another mural somewhere across the country that would be fun to travel. I just recently, on Monday, 3 days ago, finished a mural in my favorite town in the world, Silverton, Colorado. I stayed there for 6 months this year and was really happy that I was able to kind of like leave my artistic mark on a town that means so much to me at the end of it. But yeah, it's a fun way of like, of stringing together a couple different artistic outlets to make money while I'm on the road. So my favorite part about being a nomad, I think, is just, so nowadays I think I've been to 48 states. So I feel like maybe I'm a little bit less enthusiastic about seeing the, you know, the 7 wonders, per se, and more enthusiastic about like understanding the culture and the humanity around the world. My favorite book is Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck, and it's like, back in the 50s, he built out a truck camper called Rocinante, I think, and he set out from New York up to Maine and then down just like across the country, kind of zigzagging through the Midwest and over to California, towards, I think, like where he's from, which is like San Francisco area or something. And then back down through Texas and back up to New York. But he wrote this whole book about his like 3 months on the road, which is crazy to think like I've been on the road for 3 years now, and I feel like I don't have my book written. But but it's interesting how he set out to see just like the culture of the country and to be able to describe the American experience for what it is. And sometimes I feel like I've met and experienced some of the strangest people and aspects of American culture that I would have never predicted, like, especially just growing up in Virginia. But yeah, I think that's one of the coolest things is like, getting to know so many really cool people. Like, my best friend on the road, Sarah, lives in a van too, and I feel like we would have never met each other and formed such a close relationship if we hadn't like lived in a van to like lived in vans and like had that commonality. And it's so cool just meeting so many people like that on the road and forming these really close friendships because like you camp with someone, it's kind of like you're like housemates. Like you really have to either choose to go somewhere else or figure out how to be like roommate type situations with people, like sharing food, sharing resources, like having dogs together. Like all of our dogs, hang out or they don't hang out, and we like have to figure out what's comfortable with everyone. I think it makes you a little bit more comfortable with yourself. It makes you understand the world around you a little bit better. And just like culturally, it's really interesting learning so much about the world around me. Like, all the different ways people were raised differently than I was, and things that I don't like about that I'm not going to adopt, that I'm going to steer clear of in my own personality and behavior, and then things that I respect and think are really cool and that I should incorporate more, and then also just like differences of culture that I want to understand and respect, but maybe I don't have to bring it into my house, but I can be aware of it. So I think the people aspect has been the coolest thing about nomad lifestyle. I've reorganized and kind of like rebuilt a couple times in here. Everything I put in here was like pretty modular, if that makes sense. And I like to kind of theorize about how I would just like rebuild it if I got the same exact bus and like started fresh. But honestly, I feel like just at this point, I'm really comfy with how everything is. I finally like reached that point where I've stopped trying to make it look really pretty and whatever. And I think like for me now it's just like don't strive for Pinterest, just like strive for like what your 6-year-old self wanted your room to be. Like throw fur and pink and rainbow pom-poms everywhere, like mix and match things, just like whatever makes you happy, let it be. And little things like this is so untidy and like weird looking, but I've just found after all this time that on the road, like this is so practical for me, just having like a throw all for all my electronics that I use on a daily basis, because I do work on my laptop like every day and on my iPad, so it's like really useful just like have everything right here, even though it's not that cute. And I just think like maybe having like less pressure to make everything look pretty and just more functional. Like I don't want all my ramen noodles to fall out on the floor while I'm driving across the country and then like have them be crunched up by the time I get there. So like even if the ramen noodle storage is less beautiful, if it's more functional, you'll be happier in the long run. Just being like a little bit easier on myself about how things look. Like this isn't that great, but I feel like after a few years of living with it this way, it's like really, I've finally gotten everything to a point where I'm like, this is just where this goes. It doesn't have to be pretty. As long as it's functional, your pans can all go right here. Just always put them back in the same spot. And I think the number one thing I would change about my bus build is my floor originally had a hatch for the fuel pump, and in South Dakota last year, I had to tear my hardwood floors up to reach that hatch to replace my fuel pump in a Love's Travel Stop parking lot. And along with just like being easier on myself, instead of like being devastated about the whole floor being ruined, I just put a couple screws in it, and I put this carpet over it and ignore that it happened. But if I were to go back, I would definitely just, like, create hardwood floors around the hatch. Like, build with the hatch, because, like, those access points are really useful for the engine that you're living over top of. Yeah. I guess a couple gadgets that I ended up using a lot. My jet boil is really useful, just, like, making coffee really early and, like, not having to mess with anything in the actual kitchen. Like, your jet boil boils water in a minute, and while that seems so extra when you're, like, living in a house and are used to, like, having access to a Keurig or, like, a microwave or just, like, a stovetop that always works at any altitude, like, the moment you, like, try to light your stove at 10,000 feet of elevation and it won't turn on, and then you can't find a lighter that will work, and you're scrummaging around for fucking matches, like, yeah, the jet boil just, like, makes heating things up really easy, and it's, like, kind of one of those things where if you need a really quick lunch, like, you can boil oatmeal or, I don't know, like, make yourself tea. That's been kind of cool. And then just, like, a lot of random dog things that, like, gear for dogs has been kind of, like, my one splurge item that I just, like, guiltlessly do. Like, leads for them. She has never been on a leash ever, but Dragon will go to the closest barbecue and, like, give his opinion on every type of macaroni there. So he, like, occasionally just needs, like, an assortment of weird leashes, and he's also, like, really prone to getting cold, so he needs boots and, like, coats and sweaters and, like, more stuff than I have for myself, and I feel like that's really okay, because it's just, like, making the dogs really comfortable on the road. It's been, saved me a lot of, like, hassle and anxiety, and, yeah, like, dog gear, jet boil.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your story with us.
Yeah, thank you.
And where can people connect with you?
I'm on Instagram at Rita and the Road. And I have a website, ritaandtheroad.com. I post more of my art on the website, but yeah, try to incorporate it in both.
Where to next?
After this, I'm trying to line up a couple of murals in San Diego soon, and then heading down to Baja with some friends for a good portion of the winter.